The sun hung low over the dusty plains, painting the horizon in streaks of fire and gold. The wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it a chill that promised the coming night. In the middle of that endless expanse, a small, ramshackle cabin stood like a stubborn memory of a time long past. Its wooden planks were weathered, its roof sagging in places, but it held the warmth of life within. Inside, a woman sat by the hearth, her hands resting protectively over her rounded belly, and the shadows of the room danced across her face. She looked weary, her eyes tracing every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind against the walls, as if expecting something she could neither name nor see. A sudden sound made her stiffen. The sharp crack of a branch breaking in the near distance sent her heart into a frantic rhythm. She had been alone for weeks, waiting, hiding, carrying a secret that could not yet be revealed. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, the firelight flickering across her worried expression. The cabin's door opened with a long, slow groan, and she tensed as a shadow fell across the threshold. He stepped inside with the quiet certainty of a man who knew the land and every sound it made. His boots left faint prints in the dust, and the brim of his hat cast his face in darkness. But there was something in the way he moved, gentle, careful, yet deliberate, that made her chest tighten. She had seen men before, travelers, drifters, but there was a different weight to him, an echo of something more than mere presence. And then he spoke. "Mother," he said. Kneeling before her in the quiet humility of a child, kneeling before a parent, the word hit her like a stone against the ribs. She froze, her hands trembling involuntarily. "Please don't call me that," she said, her voice low but firm, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. He did not flinch. Instead, he remained on his knees, eyes steady, unwavering. "I must," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of generations, of histories written in blood and survival, of unspoken bonds that neither distance nor danger could sever. The fire cast long shadows over his strong, weathered features, but it did not soften the intensity in his gaze. She had always known he would come one day. But knowing and facing were two different things entirely. Outside, the wind seemed to pause as if the land itself held its breath. The cabin walls, steeped in years of solitude, now bore witness to a moment that was both terrifying and necessary. She thought of the days when she had been young, when the world was wide and full of promises she could not yet name. She had walked through forests and valleys, had known the rhythm of rivers and the call of the eagles, but nothing had prepared her for this confrontation. For the reckoning that had found her now, he shifted slightly, just enough for her to notice the scar along his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands that betrayed an inner storm he did not show to the world. He had carried his own burdens across the plains, had faced enemies both seen and unseen, and yet here he knelt, surrendering something deeper than any battle could claim. The air between them was thick, charged with the weight of unspoken truths. She wanted to step back, to deny what she felt, to protect herself and the life growing within her. And yet she could not. There was a pull in his presence, a gravity that seemed to reach through every fear she had wrapped around her heart. The wind whistled again, rattling the cabin's windows, and she felt the world outside the thin walls of wood and dust pressing in, reminding her that nothing could remain hidden forever. "Why now?" she whispered, almost to herself. Her voice was barely audible, yet it carried across the small space as though it were a command to the universe itself. "Because it cannot wait," he said. His words were simple, but the weight behind them made her chest ache. He did not explain, could not yet explain. Some truths demanded patience, and some moments, once arrived, could not be ignored. He looked at her with the same quiet strength that had carried him through storms and nights spent under open skies. There was a history in his gaze, one that she recognized but had long tried to forget. Her hands rested on her belly again, and she felt the life inside her stir, as if sensing the tension, the fear, and the possibility of connection. She had carried a secret, yes, but she also carried hope, fragile and tender. Like the first buds of spring after a harsh winter, she did not yet know if hope was enough, or if survival demanded harder choices. But the presence of the man kneeling before her stirred something long dormant. The fire flickered and cast strange shapes against the walls, mimicking the turbulence inside her. Memories surfaced unbidden, the laughter of long-ago days, the pain of betrayal, the loneliness of nights spent with only the wind for company, and through it all, the steady heartbeat of the plains. The rhythm of a life lived at the edge of danger and beauty persisted. He reached forward, his hand hovering near hers without touching, as if the act of connection itself carried consequences heavier than any weapon. "I did not come to demand," he said softly. "I came to honor." She wanted to believe him, to lower the walls she had built over years of fear and self-preservation. But belief was a fragile thing, especially in a land that demanded courage for every step, for every choice. She swallowed hard, feeling the tension tighten her throat, and for a moment, the past and present collided so completely that she felt as though the cabin itself might collapse under the weight of their history. A sudden noise outside shattered the fragile, distant shout. A stamp of hooves on hardened earth, and both turned toward the window, their senses sharpened by instinct and experience. Danger, perhaps, or merely the reminder that the world beyond the cabin was still wild, still untamed. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The presence of threat was enough to pull them both into the immediacy of survival. Yet neither could deny the deeper current pulling them together. She looked at him again, searching for answers that would not come, for reassurance that the world could still offer something beyond fear and loss. He met her gaze, steady and unyielding, silent promise that the moment was only beginning. Outside, the sun disappeared completely behind the distant hills, and the plains fell into shadow. The cabin seemed smaller, enclosed by night and uncertainty. Yet inside it, the air shimmered with tension, with unspoken truths, with a fragile hope that dared not speak its name aloud. And then he spoke again, a single word that carried a weight beyond measure. "Mother." She drew a breath, sharp and unsteady, and the fire crackled as if echoing her inner turmoil. The world beyond the cabin waited, vast and unpredictable. But inside, something had shifted irrevocably. The wind howled, the shadows danced, and she knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. Her heart pounded as she tried to decide to choose between fear and trust, between the life she had protected and the life that now demanded acknowledgement. The moment stretched, suspended in the fragile balance between past and future, and in that suspended silence, the story waited just beyond the threshold. Ready to unfold? The door shuddered as a gust of wind pressed against it, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath. She tightened her grip on the blanket, her eyes never leaving him, never leaving the word he had spoken. And in that charged stillness, one truth became clear. The journey had begun, and there would be no turning back. The night outside pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing, thick and unyielding, yet inside the air was electric with a tension that neither time nor distance could diminish. She studied him, taking in every detail she had long since memorized from stories and whispers his broad shoulders. The faint lines etched by sun and wind, the way his eyes seemed to carry a map of lands she had never walked. There was a history in him, and in that history lay truths she was only beginning to face. He shifted slightly, the weight of his presence filling the small room without a sound. The firelight flickered across his features, highlighting the roughness of his skin, the faint scars on his hands and arms that told of past struggles and survival. She wondered how he had lived so long out in the wild, what dangers he had faced, and what had brought him now to this lonely cabin on the edge of the plains. There were questions she dared not ask, not yet. And yet curiosity and fear clawed at her in equal measure. Her own story was no less tangled. She had come to this place years ago, fleeing towns that whispered rumors and men who asked too many questions. She had learned to move silently, to trust the land more than people, and to carry her secret close to her chest. The child she carried was not merely a life. It was a symbol of choices made in shadow, of love and loss that the world outside had never understood. Every step she had taken to reach this point had been guided by caution, by the instinct to survive. Yet now, the man kneeling before her threatened to unravel all the careful barriers she had built. He spoke again. His voice low but steady, each word deliberate as if he waited against some unspoken code. "You cannot run forever. I have followed the trail, through rivers, through forests, through storms that would have broken lesser men. I have come because it is time to face what has been kept hidden too long." She swallowed hard, the firelight catching the moisture in her eyes. There was a truth in his words, undeniable. But she could not yet see what it meant for the life she carried, or the life she had tried so desperately to protect. He had traveled far, she realized, not just in distance, but through a maze of history and hardship that she could only begin to imagine. And in that realization came a sense of both awe and dread. He rose slowly to his feet, careful not to startle her, and for a moment, there were two figures caught in a fragile balance. Surrounded by the quiet power of the plains and the whispering night, "I know the dangers you have faced," he said, "and I know the reasons you chose this place. But hiding can only last so long. Shadows grow, and time does not forgive." She clenched her fists, feeling the first real tremor of fear since he had arrived. He spoke of shadows and time, and though she understood the words, she could not yet see the shape of the threat they implied. There had always been dangers, raiders, storms, men who judged her without understanding, but something about the weight in his voice suggested a different kind of peril, one that had followed him across miles and years. The wind moaned through the cracks in the cabin walls, rattling the old wood like distant drums. She glanced toward the window, toward the darkness where the plains stretched endlessly, where dangers might wait in silence. Her mind raced, sifting through memories she had buried, faces she had avoided, and choices that had brought her to this fragile point. The man before her had appeared as if summoned by the land itself, a living echo of a past she thought she had left behind. "I do not understand," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. "Why now? Why after all this time?" He hesitated, looking toward the floor, as though the weight of his own memories pinned him in place. "There are things you were never told," he said, "stories kept in the dark to protect you, to protect others. But secrets cannot remain buried forever, and the truth has a way of finding its voice." Her mind recoiled from his words, yet curiosity pricked at her relentlessly. What truth could be so urgent, so powerful, that it demanded he'd track her down across plains and forests, braving whatever dangers the land might hold? She felt the stirrings of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, hope intertwined with fear, a dangerous cocktail that could either save her or destroy everything she held dear. He stepped closer, and she could see now the intensity in his eyes, the unflinching determination. "You have done what you must to survive," he said, "but survival alone is not enough. There are ties that bind us beyond choice, beyond time. I am here to honor them, even if it is not safe, even if it risks everything." Her breath caught. Ties beyond choice, beyond time? What could he mean? And yet, despite the rising questions, she felt a strange comfort in his presence, as if he carried not just danger, but a kind of certainty that had eluded her for years. The night seemed to tighten around the cabin, the shadows pressing in closer, and she realized that nothing about this encounter was ordinary. The man before her was a link to a past she had tried to forget, a past she now understood was not finished with her yet. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant echo of hooves and voices. She tensed again, sensing that the world beyond the cabin was alive, moving and waiting. There were others, perhaps, who did not wish for this reunion, others whose presence would bring conflict and danger. The plains were wide but not endless. Secrets rarely stayed buried when hearts and lives were at stake. He lowered his gaze, and for a moment the cabin was silent, except for the crackling of the fire. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "You never were, even when it seemed the world had turned its back. And now the choices you make will shape more than just your life. They will shape the life that grows within you, and the lives of those who come after." She felt a shiver pass through her, both from the cold and from the weight of his words. She had always believed in her own strength, in her ability to endure and protect. But the realization now pressed upon her that endurance alone would not be enough. There were forces at play she did not yet understand. Currents that pulled in directions she could not foresee. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle kick that reminded her of the fragile life she carried. The child was part of the future, a future that was now entangled with the man before her, with histories she had yet to uncover, and with dangers that lurked in the shadows of the plains. She did not know what awaited her, but she understood that the time of waiting was over. He moved to the window, peering out at the darkness, and she followed his gaze. The night was vast and unbroken, but she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the sense that the plains themselves held secrets that would not remain silent. The sound of hooves drew closer, the rhythm of them echoing in her chest, a drumbeat of warning that the world outside had not forgotten her, and that the past she carried had not finished its pursuit. Turning back to her, he spoke with quiet urgency. "We cannot stay hidden. The land may protect us for a time, but the truths we carry will demand confrontation. There are choices to make and paths to follow, and the longer we wait, the more danger grows." She swallowed hard, the room suddenly feeling smaller, yet alive with possibilities and threats. Her mind raced, weighing instinct against necessity, fear against hope. There was no simple answer, no easy escape. And yet she could sense that the presence of the man before her was not merely coincidence. He had crossed mountains and rivers, faced unknown dangers, and come to her for a reason that went beyond explanation. The fire flickered once more, casting long, restless shadows across the walls. Outside, the plains seemed to hold their breath, and the wind whispered secrets she could not yet hear. She knew that the night was far from over, that the story they were part of had only just begun, and that every choice she would make in the coming hours could change everything. The cabin settled into a tense quiet, broken only by the soft crackle of flames and the distant echo of hooves. She sat back, drawing her knees close, and studied him again. He was patient, unwavering, a man shaped by the land and time, carrying the weight of history and the promise of truths long kept. And in that quiet, fraught moment, she realized that her life, her child, and the legacy she carried were now inseparably linked to him. Outside, the darkness pressed in, holding secrets, holding threats, holding the unknown. And inside, the cabin seemed both sanctuary and stage for the unfolding drama. For the reckoning that neither of them could yet fully see, the wind shifted again, when with it came the faint sound of voices. Just beyond the line of sight, just beyond the certainty of safety. She glanced at him and he nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that the night's trials were only beginning. And in that shared look, the unspoken truth settled between them. The past was not finished, the dangers were real, and the path ahead would demand courage beyond anything either of them had faced before. The story waited in the darkness, and the plains, vast and unforgiving, were ready to reveal the next chapter. The night had grown deeper, settling over the plains like a thick, dark blanket. The cabin, small and fragile against the vastness outside, seemed to pulse with its own life, every creak of the wood and flicker of fire carrying weight. She sat close to the hearth, her hands pressed to her belly, feeling the life within move with a rhythm that reminded her of both hope and responsibility. The man across from her stood by the window, his silhouette outlined by moonlight, scanning the darkness beyond as if he could read the secrets. Hidden in the shadows, there was a tension in the room that neither of them tried to ease. The word he had spoken, mother, had shifted everything. It had opened doors she had thought forever closed and awakened questions that had lain dormant. Her mind refused to stop racing. Who had he become in all these years? What dangers had he faced? And why had he chosen this moment to appear, as if the years of solitude and caution she had practiced meant nothing to him? Outside, the wind carried sounds that made her heart tighten. Hooves, voices distant but clear enough to stir alarm. She could not tell whether they were friends, strangers, or enemies, only that they had come too close, and that the vast plains could conceal more than she was willing to risk. The man noticed her gaze and spoke without turning. "The plains are never empty," he said quietly. "They carry whispers of those who pass, and some of those whispers are dangerous. We cannot ignore them. Her mind went back to her arrival at this cabin years ago, when she had sought solitude. She had thought herself clever, hiding from the towns, from the questions, from the men who had eyes too sharp and curiosity too broad. She had learned to move silently, to listen for threats in the softest sounds, to trust the land more than any person. Yet here he was, a figure from a past she had tried to bury, standing in her refuge, reminding her that some dangers were not so easily escaped. He turned from the window, his eyes catching the firelight, sharp and steady. "There are forces at work," he said, "that do not forgive, that do not forget. And the choices you have made, the life you carry, have drawn attention. We must be ready for what comes next." She swallowed, a knot of fear and defiance twisting in her chest. "Attention?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "From who? From what?" He hesitated, and she caught a flicker of something: hesitation, worry, perhaps a memory too heavy to share. "There are those who will not see this reunion as it should be," he said finally. "They see only threats, weaknesses, opportunities. The plains have long memories, and not all of them are kind." She felt a shiver pass through her. She had always known the world outside the cabin could be cruel, but the weight in his words suggested a danger that was different, a threat that went beyond simple survival. The life she carried now seemed fragile against a tide of forces she could not yet name. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the stirrings inside as if the child itself sensed the looming tension. He moved closer, but still carefully, maintaining the space between them. "You were never alone," he said again, as if trying to impress the truth upon her. "Even when you believed you were. There are bonds we cannot break, paths we cannot avoid, and the time has come to face them. But there is more than one way to approach this, and there is more than one danger to consider." She listened, her heart pounding, as he began to outline pieces of a story she had never known, fragments of a past tied to the Apache people, to lands she had walked only in dreams, and to her own family history. Each word seemed to pull her deeper into a web she could not yet untangle. She had always believed she was a lone traveler in this world, yet now she saw the illusion for what it had been. Her life, her child, her choices, they were threads in a larger tapestry, one woven with power, conflict, and secrets. Outside, the distant voices grew louder, but still vague enough to remain a question rather than a statement. Hooves kicked up dust that glittered in the moonlight, signaling movement, search, pursuit. She thought of the travelers she had encountered in her time on the plains, some kind, some cruel, all carrying their own motives. And now it seemed she was at the center of a pursuit she could neither predict nor avoid. He knelt beside her then, close enough for her to see the lines of experience etched into his face, the faint tremor in his hands that came not from weakness, but from the weight of what he carried. "There are those," he whispered, "who would take what is ours, who would exploit the past to control the future. You have shielded this life as best you could, but shielding is not enough. We must act carefully, and yet decisively." Her mind whirled. He spoke of threats she had not imagined, of enemies she had never met. Yet there was an undeniable truth in his words. The plains themselves seemed to confirm it, the rustle of grass, the distant shout, the echo of hooves. They were being watched, tracked, followed, and the stakes had suddenly grown larger than she could measure. For a long moment, silence settled between them. She studied him, trying to find answers in his eyes, trying to measure the dangers he hinted at. She had always been practical, cautious, ready to defend herself and the life within her. But now her caution was no longer enough. There was a need for trust, for action, and for decisions that could not be delayed. He shifted, bringing a small bundle from behind him. She recognized it immediately: tools, maps, and notes that suggested preparation. Foresight, knowledge of paths and dangers she had never considered. "We have to plan," he said, "but we also have to remain alert. Time is not on our side, and the land does not wait for hesitation." She nodded, knowing he was right, even as fear tightened her chest. She looked at the fire, at the shadows that danced across the walls. and thought of all the moments that had brought her to this night, the choices made in secrecy, the roads traveled alone, the careful avoidance of danger. And yet it all seemed suddenly fragile, small, inadequate against the larger forces now in motion. The distant sounds outside reminded her that the world beyond the cabin was alive, unpredictable, and potentially hostile. She could feel the pull of history, of legacy, of unfinished stories, pressing down on her like the weight of the night itself. Her mind traced every option, every possible path, knowing that the wrong step could cost not just her safety, but the life she carried. He spoke then, quietly, almost reverently. We are part of something bigger. There are layers to this land, to our history, to our survival. We cannot face all of it at once, but we must understand enough to make the right choices. And we must remain united because division is what the others would exploit. Her hand rested on her belly again, feeling the movement of the child. And she realized that the stakes had never been clearer. This was not merely survival. This was the beginning of a confrontation with forces she could only glimpse, with a past that refused to remain buried, and with a future that demanded courage beyond anything she had yet known. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the scent of horses, smoke, and distant voices. Shadows shifted in the moonlight, and the vastness of the plains seemed to close in, reminding her that every moment of indecision could cost dearly. She looked to him, seeing in his steady gaze a reflection of her own determination, a recognition that what lay ahead would not be simple. But that avoidance was no longer an option. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on hers over the life she carried. "We face this together," he said, "not because it will be easy, but because it must be done. And because some things, some people cannot be left unprotected. Not in this world. Not ever." The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the shadows pressing closer, the firelight flickering against walls that had borne witness to countless nights. Outside, the plains were alive with unseen eyes and unheard footsteps, the world moving in ways she could not yet fully perceive. And within that tension, that fragile, charged space, she understood that the real trials were only beginning. The wind shifted once more, carrying a faint sound, a call, a warning, or perhaps a challenge. She could not tell, but the effect was immediate. A tightening of nerves, a surge of adrenaline that reminded her she was not safe. Not yet. The man beside her remained calm, but even his eyes betrayed awareness, focus, readiness. The night had become a battlefield of shadows, questions, and possibilities. She knew then, with sudden clarity, that the choice was no longer whether to act or not, but how to navigate the dangers that had found them both, how to protect the life within her, and how to confront the truths and threats that had been long denied. The night was long, the plains vast, and the forces arrayed against them were unknown, but there was no turning back. The story of their survival, of the life she carried, and of the legacy they shared was now unfolding, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first hint of dawn barely touched the horizon when a sudden movement outside made her heart lurch. Shadows stretched long across the plains, twisting in shapes that could be friend or foe. She pressed herself closer to the fire, listening, straining for every sound. The man had moved to the cabin door, lifting the latch slowly, eyes narrowing as he scanned the surrounding land. Even in the half-light, she could see the tension in his stance, the muscles in his arms coiled as if ready to spring into action. "They're close," muttered, barely audible as he stepped back. "Closer than I thought." Her hands trembled, resting lightly over her belly, feeling the life within respond to the threat like a tiny drum of warning. The plains had always been alive with danger, but this was different. The pursuit was personal, deliberate, and it carried a sense of purpose that made her skin crawl. She realized that every step they had taken to protect themselves, the careful hiding, the choice of the cabin, the avoidance of towns had led to this moment, where distance and secrecy no longer offered sanctuary. He knelt beside her, his voice low but firm. "We must move," he said. "The moment we hesitate, the advantage shifts. You understand what that could mean?" She nodded, though fear tangled with determination. Her mind traced every route she had known, every path through the hills and valleys beyond the cabin. The plains were vast, but visibility was limited, and danger could come from any direction. She could not rely on the land alone. They would have to rely on each other, and the trust between them, fragile and newly formed, was all that stood between safety and peril. Outside, a faint rustle of boots against dry grass carried on the wind. The sound was deliberate, measured, a signal that the hunters were skilled and patient. She caught a glimpse of movement, a dark figure slipping through the trees at the edge of the clearing. Her pulse quickened. She could sense the way the land itself seemed to lean toward the intrusion, every leaf, every branch, an accomplice in the rising tension. He rose slowly, signaling for her to stay low. "Do not make a sound," he whispered. "They will watch. They will wait. One wrong move and—" His voice trailed, the implication enough to send a shiver through her. She obeyed, feeling the weight of each second, as if the air itself had thickened. The fire's glow flickered against the cabin walls, throwing long shadows that merged with the darkness beyond. She could see the outline of his form as he moved to the window again, watching, listening. Every twitch, every movement, every faint sound carried a message, a warning she could not yet decipher. Memories she had long tried to bury surged forward, nights spent hiding, fleeing from those who judged her without knowledge. Moments when survival demanded cunning and patience. All of it seemed small now, dwarfed by the immediacy of the threat that pressed against the cabin. She realized that her skills, her instincts, were necessary but not sufficient. There was something larger at play, something that reached beyond the plains and the present, into histories and choices that she was only beginning to understand. He spoke again, quietly, as if sharing a truth meant only for her ears. "They know more than I anticipated. Someone has been watching, tracking, learning our movements. They are not random. They are deliberate, and we must be deliberate too." Her mind raced, considering possibilities, strategies, contingencies. The life she carried was no longer merely her own responsibility. It was entwined with his presence, with the history he represented, and with forces she could not yet fully see. The stakes had risen to a level she could scarcely name, and yet fear and instinct compelled her forward. The wind shifted once more, carrying with it a whisper of movement from behind the cabin. She turned her head slightly, catching the sound of soft footsteps on dry earth. Her pulse accelerated. Someone or something was approaching from the opposite side, perhaps attempting to flank them. The plains were alive with threats, each direction a potential danger. She looked to him, and in his eyes she saw acknowledgement of the widening peril. "We cannot wait here," he said firmly. "We must leave the cabin. It has served its purpose, but it is no longer safe. Can you move?" Her legs shook, but she nodded. Fear had given way to necessity, and survival demanded action. She rose slowly, careful not to alert anyone outside, and followed him as he stepped into the shadowed space just beyond the door. The wind carried the scent of earth and grass, the faint temps of smoke from distant fires, and the subtle, metallic scent of tension she could not name. The plains stretched before them, vast and unbroken, yet every inch was fraught with risk. She could see the outline of hills, the dark streak of a forest in the distance, and the low, rolling rise of terrain that could hide both friend and foe. Every movement had to be calculated, measured, precise. One mistake, and the life she carried, the fragile hope she nurtured, could be lost forever. He led her through the shadows, their feet moving silently over the dry grass. The distant sound of hooves and voices remained, growing gradually louder, closer, a rhythm that seemed to echo in her chest. She felt the tension coil in her stomach, her hands instinctively resting over her belly, as if the movement itself could shield the child from danger. He paused near a ridge, his hand raised, signaling her to stay low. They crouched behind a cluster of rocks, peering over the edge to see the approach of figures across the plains. The hunters were few, but skilled, moving with caution and intent. Each figure carried itself with the confidence of experience, the patience of those who understood the land and the pursuit. She counted their number, noting the weapons and gear, and realized the odds were neither in their favor nor insurmountable. They were a challenge that demanded cunning, speed, and endurance. Her mind flicked to the child within her. Every step they had taken to survive now carried the weight of protecting this life. She thought of the long nights in solitude, the fear, the hope, the quiet prayers she had offered to the wind and sky. Now, every choice had consequences far beyond herself. He leaned close, his voice steady despite the tension. We must split our attention. Watch the hill, the forest, and the plains beyond. Do not let your fear control you. Use it to guide you, to sharpen your senses. The moment they move, we must respond. She nodded, gripping a small satchel at her side, one of the few things she had brought from the cabin. Her mind tracked every detail: the wind, the rustle of leaves, the patterns of movement, the positions of the hunters. It was a dangerous game, a test of instincts and courage, and she understood that if she faltered, there would be no second chance. The hunters began to split, some moving toward the ridge they occupied, others weaving through the forest in a careful, methodical sweep. The rhythm of their approach was deliberate, almost ritualistic, and she realized that she was watching more than pursuit. She was witnessing a plan, a strategy designed to corner, intimidate, or capture. The man beside her whispered a warning. "They've seen enough to know we are here. The next moment will demand everything we have." Her heart hammered as she scanned the terrain. The first figure emerged near the tree line, pausing, scanning, listening. Another followed, crouching low, eyes sharp. She could see the reflection of determination in each face. And a cold realization settled over her. The hunters were not merely opportunists. They were experts, and their patience was a weapon. The air seemed to thicken, charged with the anticipation of confrontation. Even the wind held its breath, the plains stretching vast and silent except for the subtle, deliberate movement of hunters and prey. She felt the man's hand brush against hers, a silent acknowledgement of shared danger and mutual reliance. They were together in this, bound by necessity, by history, by survival. The first figure broke from the cover of the trees, stepping onto the open plain. Instantly, the others followed, fanning out with precision. Her breath caught. This was no random encounter. It was a calculated advance, and the ridge provided little concealment. She tightened her grip on the satchel and prepared herself. Senses stretched to the limit. The man whispered again, "We cannot wait. We move on my signal. Remember, every step counts. One misstep, and we risk everything." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the advancing figures. Her mind ran through every scenario, every possibility, every choice that could mean survival or disaster. The life within her stirred, as if aware of the danger, and she felt a fierce protective instinct rise, stronger than fear. Stronger than doubt? The hunters were close now, their movements precise, deliberate, every footfall echoing in the quiet tension of the plains. The ridge offered little cover, the rocks only partial concealment. She felt the world narrowing, focusing on the single thread of survival, the single path that could carry them forward. He glanced at her, eyes meeting hers, steady and unyielding. "Ready?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, gripping the satchel, her muscles coiled like springs. Her mind sharp, alert, prepared. The hunters were nearly upon them, their presence a silent threat pressing through the night. Every instinct, every memory, every lesson in survival had led to this moment. And yet the outcome remained uncertain. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of movement behind the ridge. Another figure, or perhaps more, approaching from a different direction. The tension tightened, stretched to a breaking point, and the night seemed to hold its breath along with them. He gave a subtle nod, a signal, and she understood. The moment had come, the brink of confrontation. Every choice, every move, every second counted. They would step into the unknown, into the confrontation that had been building since her first flight across the plains. And the world beyond the ridge was waiting, silent, vast, and alive with danger. And in that moment, she knew that everything hung by the thinnest thread: her life. The life within her, the truths long buried, and the futures they both carried. The plains stretched endlessly before them, the hunters closing. The night held a promise of confrontation unlike anything she'd ever faced. The story was poised on the edge of a knife. Every heartbeat a drum of suspense, every shadow a question. Every breath a step toward the climax that had been coming for years. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, washing the plains in pale gold. The tension that had gripped the night began to ebb, replaced by a fragile calm that felt almost unreal after hours of fear and anticipation. She lowered herself from the ridge, her knees aching, her hands still pressed protectively over her belly. The man beside her moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced storms before, yet the relief in his eyes mirrored her own shared acknowledgement that they had survived together. The hunters had retreated, their presence now nothing more than footprints fading in the soft morning grass. She did not question why they had pulled back, only that the threat had lessened enough for them to breathe. Every sound of the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of wind through the tall grasses, felt sharper, clearer, imbued with the promise of safety and the reminder of what had almost been lost. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave her body in small, controlled bursts, her mind still racing with everything that had transpired. He knelt beside her again, resting a hand on her shoulder. "The worst is behind us," he said softly. "For now. But you have shown strength I hoped you still carried. You survived through the fear, through the unknown, and you protected what mattered most." She allowed herself a small, weary smile. Strength had been a necessity, not a choice, but hearing it spoken aloud gave it weight beyond mere survival. The plains around them seemed vast and endless. Yet there was comfort in their emptiness, a sense of freedom reclaimed after the relentless tension of the night. The fire that had once flickered in the cabin now burned quietly in her memory, its warmth symbolic of endurance, of resilience. They began the slow walk back to the cabin, each step deliberate and careful. She noticed the subtle changes in the land now that the threat had passed the soft dew on the grass. The warmth beginning to return to the earth, the clear outlines of distant hills. Life continued, stubborn and resilient, even after darkness and danger. She felt a sense of connection to the plains she had not felt in years, as if the land itself recognized their struggle and offered its quiet acknowledgement. Once inside, she set down the small satchel she had carried, emptying it of supplies and maps. She examined each item, noting the practicality and care in their selection, and realized how much preparation had gone into their survival. The man watched her with quiet respect, his presence calm but alert, a steady anchor in the aftermath of chaos. "You are not alone," he said again, the words carrying a depth she had not yet fully appreciated. "And even when the world seems vast and unforgiving, you are never truly without allies. There are bonds that cannot be broken, and family is sometimes found in the most unexpected places." Her mind drifted back to the years she had spent in solitude, the nights when she had feared discovery, the careful navigation of a world that often judged without understanding. She had believed herself alone, self-reliant, capable of enduring everything the plains threw at her. And yet in the presence of the man kneeling before her, she realized that true strength was not measured by isolation, but by connection, by trust, and by the courage to face danger together. They settled near the hearth, the fire crackling softly as morning light filtered through the cabin's thin windows. She allowed herself to relax, though not completely, knowing the plains could always demand vigilance. But for the first time in a long while, there was a sense of possibility, of a life that could be reclaimed and rebuilt. He spoke then, quietly, almost reverently. "There are truths that have been kept from you, stories long hidden, and paths that were never meant to be walked alone. You have faced part of that history tonight, and in doing so, you have begun a journey of understanding, of reconciliation, and of hope." She listened, absorbing the weight of his words. The past had been filled with shadow and secrecy, yet the night's events had brought clarity. The dangers she had feared, the unknown forces she had sensed, had been confronted and survived. And through it all, she had maintained the life she carried, the fragile hope for a future that was now within reach. Outside, the plains stretched endlessly, the golden light of morning softening the contours of hills and valleys. She could see where the hunters had passed, faint marks in the grass and soil. But no longer did they feel like an immediate threat. The land, vast and indifferent, had provided both challenge and protection, reminding her of its power and its unpredictability. The man rose and moved toward the small cabin window. Looking out across the plains, "The journey is far from over," he said, his tone measured. "There will be other challenges, other decisions, but you are no longer facing them alone. And that changes everything." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The life she carried was intertwined with the present and the past, with choices she had made in isolation, and with the presence of someone who had crossed miles, dangers, and years to stand by her side. The responsibility was great, but so was the strength she now recognized within herself. They spoke little as they prepared the cabin for the day, the quiet routine grounding them after the intensity of the night. Food was set aside, water checked, and the small space organized in a way that offered both comfort and readiness. She found herself smiling softly at the simple acts, the reassurance that life could continue, and that the land, while wild and demanding, could also provide sanctuary. He joined her near the hearth once more, sitting quietly, his presence a steady reminder that the bonds forged in adversity could endure. "There will be more to uncover," he said, "questions that need answers, history that must be understood, and paths that demand courage. But for now we have survived the night, and that is worth acknowledging." Her thoughts drifted to the child within her, the symbol of a future both fragile and resilient. The journey of survival had always been personal, but now it was shared, expanded beyond the self to include new life, new hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. The plains around them were wide, unbroken, and full of possibility, and she felt a connection to the land that went beyond mere survival. She turned to him, her eyes steady. "We survived," she said softly, "and that means something." He nodded, a faint smile breaking the intensity of his features. "It means everything," he replied. "Survival is not just about the night, or the danger, or the fear. It's about what comes next, about choices, about hope. And it's about standing together when the world expects you to stand alone." They sat in quiet reflection, the fire casting long shadows against the walls, the plains alive with light and possibility beyond the cabin. The night had tested them, revealed the depth of danger, and pushed them to the edge of fear. But it had also revealed strength, courage, and the enduring power of connection. She thought of the hunters, of the unknown forces that had stalked them, and realized that while the immediate threat had passed, vigilance remained. Life on the plains was never without challenge, yet the trials had forged a bond that would guide them through what lay ahead. She felt a sense of resolve, a quiet confidence that no matter the dangers, they could face them together. The man rose, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder once more. "We will face what comes," he said, with awareness, with courage, and with the understanding that the past, while it shapes us, does not define us. The future is ours to protect and to shape, and that is a responsibility and a gift. She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The journey had been long, the challenges immense, but the life they carried forward, the child, their bond, the reclaimed sense of safety offered a foundation for what was to come. The plains would continue to demand respect, vigilance, and strength, but she now understood that she was no longer alone in meeting those demands. As the sun climbed higher, casting warmth over the cabin and the surrounding land, she allowed herself to breathe fully for the first time in what felt like weeks. The fire crackled softly, the plains stretched endlessly, and the man beside her remained a steady presence. There was a sense of completion to the night's trials, a quiet closure. Even as the world beyond remained alive with unknowns, she rested her hands over her belly, feeling the life within respond to the calm of morning. The journey had been perilous, the conflicts intense, but the experience had forged resilience, understanding, and hope. And in that moment, she realized that while danger and uncertainty would always exist, so too did the strength to face it, the courage to endure, and the power of connection to guide the way. The plains were vast, the cabin small, yet within that space, they had reclaimed a measure of peace. The shadows of the night had passed, the hunters had gone, and the world seemed at once both immense and intimate. She felt gratitude for survival, for the bond they shared, and for the life that carried the promise of new beginnings. He stood and gazed out once more, his eyes tracing the horizon. "The past brought us here," he said, "but the future, your future, our future, is what we make of it. And it is worth every sacrifice, every fear, every challenge we have faced." She smiled, a quiet, contented smile. The tension of the night had passed, the major threats had been confronted, and the life they now protected was a testament to endurance and courage. They had faced the unknown together, and while the plains would always hold dangers, they had discovered strength in unity and hope in survival. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting light across the rolling hills and stretching plains, she understood that the night's events would shape them, teach them, and guide them. But it was the morning, the calm, the clarity, the shared resilience that offered the true resolution. Life continued, fragile yet strong, and the journey, while never simple, was theirs to navigate together. And in that quiet morning, with the plains alive in soft gold light, they allowed themselves to hope, to rest, and to begin the next chapter together, united and ready for whatever the world might bring.